In Roger Ebert's final post, published April 3rd, 2013, he reflected on his legacy. He mentioned plans to revive At the Movies in a new direction for his website. And then, unable to resist one last jab, he wrote, "And gamers beware. I'm even thinking of a movie version of a video game or mobile app. Once completed, you can engage me in debate whether you think it is art." He died the next day. It echoes how his co-host and rival, Gene Siskel, passed away shortly after announcing his own leave of absence, as if both men just had enough to say goodbye. But even on his own deathbed, Ebert, ever the shit-talking goblin, was still poking at this conflict that he had with gamers, as if he's thinking, what's the funniest thing I could do while I'm on my way out? If you don't know anything about his relationship with the gaming community, you'd be forgiven for not realizing how fully his last words poked the bear. While we're used to people selling out, Ebert wasn't in fact threatening a Clash of Clans movie, but poking fun at gamers, calling back to his legendary feud with them. Upon Ebert's death, gamers responded with their characteristic grace and restraint. Gears of War lead designer Clifford the Big Red Blazinski, ever the class act, posted something eerie about the timing of the loss of Roger Ebert and the release of the game as art in BioShock Infinite. Mike Thompson at IGN published a piece titled "Dad is Dead," rebuting Roger Ebert. I genuinely hope that when I die, some Tarantino or David Cage writer die goes online and says something equally unhinged. Wow, I'm glad that dickhead is dead. Two of the most toxic fan bases of all media, gamers and Tarantino fans. Anyways, as someone who grew up watching Ebert and Roper at the movies and who also plays and analyzes a lot of video games, the argument has always lingered in my mind for years. It's still casting a long shadow over games criticism, film criticism, and I'd even argue modern politics. I've talked about this before on my channel, and that was, gosh, 8 or 9 years ago. And well, everyone knows how I love repeatedly euthanizing that particular equestrian. And that wasn't even that hard to say. Growth. I never fully anticipated how much the backlash to Ebert's essays on video games would reverberate throughout games, movies, and culture at large, but I see the echoes repeatedly happen over and over and over again. So let's talk about how we got here. My favorite film critic was, well, is Roger Ebert. He was my first film critic, and he'll always have a great spot in my heart. Maybe because I was so familiar with his bespectacled warmth from childhood, his show At the Movies always ended the same way. I'll see you at the movies. He had a cultural footprint in America that was genuinely enormous. His reviews were emblazoned on DVD cases throughout the 2000s and early 2010s. He was the name that meant something to people who didn't follow film criticism, the one critics whose thumbs up or thumbs down actually carried weight. Everyone is out here looking for the Roger Ebert of video games, and the Roger Ebert of video games has already come and gone. His name was Roger Ebert. In 1994, 1 month before I dropped out of the battle bus into this cruel, cruel world, Wired magazine published a review of the computer game Cosmology of Kyoto. The review said of the game, the richness is almost overwhelming. There is the sense that the resources of this game are limitless and that no two players would have the same experience. There is the sense, illusory but seductive, that one could wander this world indefinitely. This is a wonderful game. Given the title of the video and how well you are able to understand French, bonjour, you may be able to guess that the author was Roger Ebert. It's surprising given how his opinion of games was portrayed, by broad culture. Hubert's fifth brother, Ebert, was not a man who hated video games. He was not dismissing the medium out of ignorance or contempt. He had actually engaged with it, found genuine wonder in it, and written about it with the same curiosity that he brought to cinema. Modern reviewers, for what it's worth, actually commend Cosmology of Kyoto as actually terrifying in its portrayal of Buddhist ideas. The game has this karma system, so he did engage with a game with mechanics. The conflict that would define his relationship with gamers didn't start until 2005 with his review of the Dwayne Johnson, Carl Urban, Rosamund Pike classic Doom, an adaptation of the 1993 classic first-person shooter game. The film is set in the far-flung futuristic year of 2026?
In the year 2026, archaeologists working in the Nevada desert discovered a portal to an ancient city on Mars.
So am I reading that right? Shit. Where a powerful corporation starts injecting people with serums that make them become violent and psychotic. In his review, Ebert wrote, "The movie has been inspired by the famous video game. No, I haven't played it, and I never will."
Doom is certainly what anybody is going to face who goes to see this movie. I agree with you that it is unbelievably bad. And you know, at the end, they just give up altogether, and there's a very, very, very long point of view sequence looking over the top of a gun.
Yes.
And the gun goes like this, and it goes like this, and a monster jumps up, and the gun shoots it. And basically, what it amounts to is, you're watching a video game and you don't even get to play. It's like some kid came into your bedroom, took over your computer, and won't let you get your hand on the controls.
There's nothing more, you're exactly right. There's nothing more frustrating than watching somebody else play a video game because you want to get your hands on the controls. So it's like somebody puts this big meal in front of you and says, now watch me eat it.
Oh, it's a bad movie.
Classic Ebert. This caused an immediate response from Gamers TM. A reader wrote in defending the Doom movie on the grounds that the game had invented the first-person perspective. Not true. That it was to gaming what Rashomon was to cinema. Not true as well. And that by being faithful, i.e. shitty, to the source material, even at the cost of being a bad movie, the film was doing something artistically valid. Ebert's response was dry and precise. "I'm a believer in the value-added concept of filmmaking, in which a movie supplies something that a video game does not. So as long as they're a great movie unseen or a great book unread, I will continue to be unable to find time to play video games." I was so excited to see Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit was rated G, and that you gave it a good review. I took my 4-year-old to see it. I was blown away that a G-rated movie would have so much sexual innuendo, curse words, and even some nudity. Did we see the same film? That has nothing to do with the video, but I had to share the broad variety of the letters Ebert responded to. All of these responses to defend a film where The Rock says it's rockin' time and rocks all over the place. Some gamers still try to defend this movie as actually pretty good, dumb fun, but I'm with Ebert. Come on, people, have standards. It's a movie the original creators were like, it's nice it exists.
A lot of people want to know, what do you think about the 2005 movie Doom?
No. They're gonna remake it, by the way.
Like how a parent treats a child they don't particularly care for. But it did plant a seed of resentment amongst gamers that would bloom into something much larger. There was a roughly 4-year pause in hostilities after the Doom review. Ebert's position was well known. Occasionally, it was referred to in gaming circles as an inside joke, but never really fully resolved or acknowledged. Writer, filmmaker, and occasional video game box decorator Clive Barker also had a minor squabble with Ebert where they argued about the definition of art. That changed in March of 2009 when Kelly Santiago, co-founder of That Game Company, that's what the company is called. I'm not saying being like, what's the game company called? You know, that one game company called? I'm saying the company that made Flower and Journey, That game company, they're called That Game Company. She's the co-founder of that studio. She gave a TED Talk arguing for the artistic merit of video games.
I'm here to tell you about video games, and to tell you that video games are, in fact, art. Great, so let's move on.
About a year later, in April 2010, Ebert responded with the post that would define his legacy in gaming forever. Video games can never be art. Now, what's notable about this post that most people who still comment on it today seem to have missed is how carefully and specifically Ebert actually argued. He wasn't ranting, he wasn't being dismissive, he was doing what he always did, which was going point by point through someone else's argument with the precision of a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, the first one to get one for film criticism. He praised Santiago directly. He encouraged readers to watch her TED Talk before reading his response. He engaged with her definition of art, that art is the process of deliberately arranging elements in a way that appeals to the senses or emotions, and pointed out, not unfairly, that the definition is broad enough to include chess, football, and mahjong, which most people would not consider art, no matter how elegant their rules are. He noted that one of Santiago's own examples in the talk was chess as art, which she argued isn't.
I mean, how could I say that a game as elegant as chess, with elegant mechanics and strategy and metaphor, how could I say that that's not art?
Seeming to contradict her own framework.
Which is, art is the process or product of deliberately arranging elements in a way that appeals to the senses or the emotions.
This gets to a deeper question about whether you believe the definitions of art should be inclusionary or exclusionary. And that's genuinely an interesting philosophical question that the Backlash never really engaged with. He was perhaps unkind about one of the examples given, the puzzle platformer 2008's Braid, describing the prose as being on the level of a wordy fortune cookie.
Huh?
After reading Ebert's post, I immediately looked to see if Jonathan Blow, creator of Braid, had an angry blog post about that. Couldn't find one though. Though Blow was famously upset that people didn't understand his pretty straightforward platformer.
And they ain't got no point to the game. You just walk around jumping on shit. It look like that.
They're not seeing the most important thing.
This shit's stupid as hell, man.
So if you saw that Soldier Boy clip, then I'm pretty sure he's read this review. Someone who is braver than me, ask him on stream and let me know what he says. It's amazing what passed for great art in the indie game space in 2008 was. Actually, Jonathan Blow fans, if those exist, are probably gonna dance all over my grave. We'll call them blowhards. Yeah, let's call him that. He's a character. Ebert's central argument, the one that aged the most captivatingly, was this. One obvious difference between art and games is that you could win a game. It has rules, points, objectives, and an outcome. Santiago might cite an immersive game without points or rules, but I would say then it would cease to be a game and becomes a representation of a story, a novel, a play, dance, a film. Those are things you cannot win. You can only experience them. It's so funny that Ebert's wading into the is Gone Home a video game debate without even realizing it. Mostly when people point to games being art, they point to the non-interactive parts, the cutscenes, the music, the art design. I've definitely argued for people to play these types of games and suggested they have artistic merit. It's one of the personal conflicts I have. Despite everything, I just want to argue with him. At the end of the day, I understand emotionally why people want to argue with him. Maybe it's because I'm a cishet male, but when I follow his logic, I feel like I can't deny his argument. This is Ebert's authorship argument. A serious film or novel requires the artist to maintain control over what the audience experiences. Interactivity, by its nature, distributes that control. The audience becomes the co-author or the author itself. And Ebert believed, not unreasonably, that this structural feature prevents games from achieving the singular intentional artistic vision associated with great works of cinema and literature. To stretch out his argument for a moment, you can say that the game itself is the tool. To the canvas, if you will, or the paintbrush is the gameplay, the art that once a player interacts with it. I know whenever I watch the Monster Factory's creations in Dark Souls games, I feel like they should be framed in the Guggenheim. And to create this exclusion of interactive media as being art is the only way we could really exclude most of sports or board games or other experiences that most, if not all of us, would consider not to be art. Maybe someone smarter can find a definition that can include video games and still exclude sports without explicitly excluding sport. He also made an observation that I want you to hold on for the rest of the video. He wondered genuinely why games felt the need to be considered as art at all. And he noted that the TED Talk arguing for games as art was made by someone who would financially benefit from an elevation of games as art. Just like many of a TED Talk, he said that it was essentially an advertisement complete with an organizational diagram of the game development pipelines to illustrate this point. I don't think Michelangelo made similar presentations to the Medicis about his art. Well, I hate to say this, but it's because art, it insists upon itself. The response was very swift and very online. Joseph Fares, the developer who later paused the Game Awards to say, "Fuck the Oscars," had some choice words for Ebert.
He's totally full of shit, that guy. You know, tell him to go fuck himself. That's how wrong. He called me the day after. It's like, Roger Ripper died today. I'm like, oh shit.
Kelly Santiago responded a few days later after Ebert published his article with an article of her own. This one was published on video game website Kotaku's website, which is actually worth reading because it's more measured and thoughtful than the broader reaction. She conceded that her own argument in the TED Talk wasn't the strongest possible one. She acknowledged that Ebert's post was, in a strange way, a validation that it had broken out of the echo chamber of gaming culture and forced a genuine critical conversation. She pointed out fairly that his post doesn't actually define art so much as, poke holes in her definition, which is always easier position to take. She also said, with what I detect as some Ebert-level snark, as a rapidly growing medium, we game developers have so many other issues deserving of our attention. She responded to his questions of Flower by essentially saying, well, why don't you play it for yourself? There is an interesting point here in defining art in her conclusion. Art is in the eye of both the creator and the beholder. And these two groups of people grow and change. So will the definition and perception of art. Maybe in the past there was a reason to exclude interactive media as art. Maybe now, because of the ways we can express ourselves through creation, is a reason to call it art. In her eyes, at least. The problem is that most people reacting to Ebert were not making arguments as careful as Santiago's. The backlash was largely what I call a one-sided parasocial demand for respect. Even for me at the time, I remember being in middle school and reading about this conflict in a PC Gamer article on the most artistic games. That's when I first heard about this. Just like how Santiago assumed that it was a foregone conclusion that every gamer agreed that games were art, I hadn't fully formed my ideas about art. I just knew reflexively that I had spent a lot of time with video games and that I felt like it needed defending. It was the era after the Dungeons and Dragons satanic panic, the Mortal Kombat congressional hearings, the period right after Sandy Hook when video games were blamed for gun violence instead of, I don't know, the guns themselves. Ebert was just another adult telling us that our thing didn't count, that it doesn't matter. It wasn't worthy of a cultural footprint or warrant further analysis, at least in my mind at the time. Ebert and later Scorsese with his Marvel comments both were simply stating their aesthetic philosophies in a very specific context, and the internet reacted as if they declared war on people's identities. And, you know, if I was to choose a side, I would be on Martin Scorsese and Roger Ebert's side, because gamers don't know what they're doing. People felt like Ebert and Scorsese were discounting whole cloth communities when their points were actually extremely measured. Despite what Ebert's inflammatory title would suggest, part of what made it so maddening is that games offer engagement that no other medium does. The only meaningful choice in a book is whether you read it in paperback, hardback, e-reader, or one of those large print copies you find in the library for very old people. But in games, the platform shapes the controls, the features, the available content, the difficulty, the entire experience. And that's before you get to the Thomas the Tank Engine Skyrim mods and all the other insane and problematic things gamers customize their games with. That's a form of authorship, even if the audience is doing it. Ebert, to his enormous credit, came back to the argument a few months later and did something that no one does on the internet. He admitted he had been too glib. The follow-up post, titled, "Okay Kids, Play on My Lawn," opens with him calling himself a fool. His opinion, he says, hasn't changed, but the tone, it's shifted entirely. He thanked the people who responded and acknowledged that most of them were, in his word, intelligent, well-written, and right about one thing in particular. "I should not have written that entry without being more familiar with the actual experience of video games." He acknowledged that even without playing the games, he understood conceptually that his argument had weaknesses. He came to realize that he had backed himself into a lose-lose situation. He could double down and drive a generational rift between gamers and critics, something that I'd argue he had already done before he said anything at all, or could reflect honestly on where his argument fell short. He chose the latter. Obviously. He pretty smartly only mentions the artsy games he's played. He's definitely played even more than he acknowledges here. I know this because I've seen the episodes of his show where he plays a lot of sports games against Gene Siskel. I think this is where it all started. He lost a lot, and maybe this is where he developed his hatred of video games. All from here, this, right here, this moment. Maybe if Gene had let him win, he won't have grown so bitter.
You know, I was going to say, I got one of these sets at home and I started playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with it. And after a while, after about a week of this, I would find that every time I had a spare moment, or every time I came home, I was in front of the set playing with these mutant turtles, and it got to the point where it was making me quite unhappy because I was so obsessed with it. And I finally unplugged the machine and I said, that's it for Nintendo, because it seems to me that it's so hypnotic and so repetitive that it was just not good for my mental health.
He ended the essay the way he began it, by saying that he had been a fool for mentioning video games in the first place. It's somewhat sad that a Pulitzer Prize-winning author was essentially beaten into a rhetorical surrender by an internet mob that largely never engaged with his actual argument. I wish people had argued with his central point. Instead, 4,547 mostly critical comments kept coming, and the same objections just were repeated louder. Here's what I found interesting about how his argument has aged. Ebert's position was that interactivity destroys authorial control. Without authorial control, you can have craftsmanship, but not art. Most of the people arguing against him, including games critics, games journalists, and the gaming community, broadly insisted that games could and did achieve the kind of uncompromised authored vision he was asking for. It turns out what people wanted wasn't for games to be art, They wanted for art to be validated on gamers' terms. Those are two different things. And this connects to something darker. The gaming community's hostility towards criticism and the reflective rage at anybody suggesting that their medium should be held to a standard was weaponized deliberately. The banning, how do I even describe him? I'll just stick to the fact. The former chief strategist to Donald Trump has spoken openly about how Gamergate was a recruiting ground, a place where young men's anger at being told their culture didn't really count could be redirected to a broader political project. The same psychological pattern that made gamers pile onto a dying man for the crime of having the aesthetic position, it made them susceptible to a movement that told them that critics, journalists, and artists were their enemies. This was not a mere coincidence, it was a pipeline, really. It scaled, and it starts with the insistence that no one outside the community has the right to evaluate what the community values, or to not want to change, to not consider things in a broader sense. And this gets really into why I wanted to cover this small part of Ebert's life. I watched movies with Mark's video on one of the most currently popular movie critics, Critical Drinker. It is a deep dive covering the factual inaccuracy and bad faith arguments that Drinker makes. He calls up others to direct the conversation back on track.
Likewise, there is a way to stop letting people like the Critical Drinker dominate the narrative. Bad faith narratives like this only get pushed because of the mouth on the Critical Drinker. But you have a mouth too. You have a platform to say it on. Posting a video on YouTube or an article on WordPress blogs costs you nothing. Drinkers' incorrect assumptions will only remain popular and accepted if they're not challenged. And you don't have to accept that. You can disprove these false narratives being spread. You don't have to remain silent when incorrect and bad faith arguments are being made, and polluting the topic of movie critique with more to disprove than to dissect.
And this is me using my platform to talk about this factual inaccuracy that I saw over 15 years ago. I will let you think about this on your own terms. I felt like bringing this up is something to rediscover. And leaving it unresolved allowed it to fester into all of this we see around us. We're not trying to immediately change the opinions of Critical Drinker's audience and chuds like him. We're just trying to make them think. There is something to the argument that making content directly interrogating bad faith arguments causes not only the grifter to at least pause and think about their actions, even if they don't do it publicly, but also their audiences. To see the effectiveness, look at when creators lose their audience, when it turns out they're shitty people. Or, of course, you could point to many a shitty person that still has a career for some reason, but sometimes these things take time. The focus should really be to just have people consider other perspectives and come to their own conclusions. Doing this instead of instinctively acting like crazy people allows for more sophisticated conversations to happen. What's striking is when you look at actual developers, is that some agree with Ebert, especially one that gamers meme and hold very dearly to themselves. Hideo Kojima has said in the past that games are not an art early in his career, though I feel like this is because he doesn't have the authorial control he would like. There's too many cooks in the pot. She's a crazy man. He likes film anyways most of the time. He's wanted to make a film, but I don't know, for some reason he hasn't. The creator of Mario, Shigeru Miyamoto, has described those games as toys for adults. Kim Swift, who made Portal, thinks of games as products. It's critics and players, the people who consume games and spend most of their times around it, not make them, who are the most insistent in the art designation. And even when the gaming community, when a game is too esoteric or narrative focused, it gets diminished or as pretentious or not a real game. The community claims to want art, but often punishes the games that are most seriously attempted. Even if they don't directly respond to Ebert's points, These developers argue with Ebert's thesis that video games will never be art. I've called games artistic before, actually. In my last video about Kentucky Route Zero, which you should watch if you haven't, I do think games can achieve something that deserves serious critical attention. But the framing of are games art was always the wrong question, really. And Ebert's follow-up, why do games even need to be considered as art, is the more interesting one that nobody really answered. Here's what I actually think. Art is not a quality designation. I said this in my last art video. Check that out if you haven't. Art isn't inherently good. Calling something art doesn't make it worthy of your time. Ebert, bless him, gave Paul Blart Mall Cop 3 out of 4 stars, praising it for making a fat guy the hero. Maybe he saw a little of himself in the movie.
Oh no, I'm sweating like Roger Ebert.
That's the same rating he gave for the Oscar award-winning Zero Dark 30, which actually, now that you think of it, yeah, maybe Zero Dark 30 is as good as Paul Blart Mall Cop. And if you were curious, he did give Curse of the Were-Rabbit 4.5 stars, so there you have it. Curse of the Were-Rabbit is better than Paul Blart Mall Cop in Zero Dark 30.
You know, another movie still in theaters, which the world agrees with me about, is Wallace and Gromit.
The world?
Yes. The
Really?
Yes, the Wallace and Gromit picture.
It's sweeping Antarctica as we
got
speak.
fabulous reviews, the best reviewed movie of the year, the most popular movie of the weekend, all except for you.
Just me. Well, you know, I thought it was whimsical, and then it
whimsical
just
is a good word.
going. Yeah, I know, but it was about 85 minutes of whimsy, and I needed only about 15 minutes of it. Now, here's a movie that probably will never be described as whimsical. It's called Doom.
He also wrote that if Daniel Craig retired, that he would support Kevin James as being the next James Bond. And I don't think he's joking. You can disagree with Ebert on taste while acknowledging that his framework for thinking about criticism is useful. You can like trash and acknowledge it's trash, and you don't have to make it high art to defend your enjoyment of it. Here's the quiet coda to the whole story. RogerEbert.com began publishing video game reviews in 2017, written by Brian Tallarico, Ebert's successor as managing editing of his site. The argument wasn't fully formally resolved. Tallarico would go on to publish a list curating the best blog posts by Roger Ebert. He says of the games will never be art post that he had wished he had debated this with Ebert while he was still alive. He also says that Ebert was always open to disagreement, something that I feel like all writers should embrace a little. Roger seemed to thrive on it sometimes, deepening his arguments. While he never belittled the art writers he disagreed with. Nobody declared a victory. History just moved forward, and his website started covering games. The war ended not with a treaty, but really with a shrug and a new content vertical. There's still a yearning for Roger Ebert of video games, a critic who bridges popular culture with a serious aesthetic criticism, the way that Roger Ebert did for film. People float names. I love Noah Caldwell Gervais's lo-fi folksy travelogue reviews, but he is niche in a way that Ebert never was. Ebert gave his critics his best advice, though. Tell the reader who you are.
Tom.
Correct.
I think that one of the things that I feel about young people writing, or any criticism at all, by anybody of any age, is either implicitly or not, it's in the first person.
Correct.
And it's not a science, and you're not talking about the truth, and you're not saying, this is what happened. What you're saying is, this is what happened to me. This is how I feel. I almost think that in journalism school, they should make all reviews and criticisms be in the first person to remind people that it's their own view and not some kind of a scientific, objective overview, because there's no such thing as objectivity in the arts. It's all subjective, and you might as well admit that.
I find that advice uncomfortable because I spent a lot of my time on computers. Writing personally about that feels a little bit like admitting something. I barely like talking about myself in my day-to-day life, let alone a YouTube video being beamed out to God knows how many strangers. But the point was, the critic's job is not to be a neutral evaluator. It's to be a specific human being encountering a specific work and reporting honestly on what happened to them. The variation in how we experience things isn't a flaw in the system. That might be the whole point. Gamers yelled at a dying man who physically could not speak with his own voice anymore, demanding that he understand him. But true art is about trying to understand others. Ebert's wife, Chaz, wrote about his final days. She described him writing a note that read, "This is all an elaborate hoax." She asked him what was a hoax. He said he was talking about his world, this place. He said it was all an illusion. She thought he was confused, but he was not confused. He wasn't visiting heaven, not in the way we think of heaven. He described it as a vastness that you can't even imagine. It was a place where the past, present, and future was all happening at once. On April 4th, he was strong enough to go home. His daughter and Chaz went to pick him up. When they got there, the nurses were helping him get dressed. He was sitting on his bed. He looked really happy to be going home. He was smiling. He was sitting almost like the Buddha. And then he just put his head down. The last words of his final post, "I'll be there. I'll see you at the movies, Roger."
With no words to say that he loved her so much. His hand seemed...
Thanks to my wife, Erin. She helped me edit the script. Really, she is my best boy, and I love you, Erin. So, as I said in this video, I've loved Roger Ebert for a very long time that I could remember. He's probably the biggest influences on me falling in love with films and writing about films. So I wanted to talk about him for a very long time, but I couldn't figure out how to do it on this channel until now. So thank you for indulging me. Let me know if you think I did well and there's anything else you think I could talk about here. Until next time, if you can, do something nice for someone. Bye.